Welcome to the Omen Comics Podcast, where we talk about everything from writing comics to the philosophies held within them. My name is Michael Nunneley, the creator of the Omenverse, and with me, as always, is my friend Steve Sellers, the creator of the Blitzverse.
Hello, this is Michael Nunley and my friend Steve Sellers here. We're going to talk about horror today, and not just horror, but how you make a horror comic, how you make horror in writing in general. Uh, we wanted to talk first about the what I like to call the four building blocks, the four square roots of horror. Um, I think that when you first are getting into what it is that makes a movie a horror film, I think when you get down to the roots of it, when you boil all the hair off of it, you're talking about the person experiencing the story being uncomfortable, and usually it's to an extreme degree. Obviously, uncomfortable is somewhat of a lazy term, but that's where it comes from. You got to get them out of their comfortable zone and in a place where they're feeling uneasy. And I
Mhm.
think that is the root really of what makes a horror movie rather than say like an action movie or something like that.
Yeah, and I would have to say, like the remake of The Evil Dead, I think really hit that one very, very well. And the reason I'm saying this is you have this drug addict who is dragged out to a cabin in the woods where she does not want to be at all. And in that situation, she is at her least comfortable.
Uh,
Not just because of the place, but because of this idea that she can't get what she wants. She can't get that next fix. And
ah,
so and so all of that ties in, with these things that she's seeing. And so the question is, is it some horrible thing, or is it, her drug hallucinations kind of playing with her? And so you're getting a little bit of that. Uh, so when you're talking about getting people out of your comfort zone, that is kind of basically the first step that you use to lead into the horror and the terrible things happening.
good point. Good point. Yes, you want not just the person uh, reading the story or watching the story to be in that uncomfortable space. In order to get that person, the reader, to that point, the characters themselves have to be out of their comfort zone, is what you're saying.
Yes, exactly.
Right. Nice point. So I think that beyond that, everything else seems to kind of stem from that getting them out of their comfort zone point, in my opinion, and that is typically done, I think, through two main avenues uh, that both lead to the same end, and those avenues would be the unknown and the imagined.
Okay. Yeah. And I would say that the unknown plays very, very heavily in the horror. Lovecraft particularly talked about this, and I would say that he also probably did it more effectively than most, with the idea that there's this veil beyond the world we know, and there are all sorts of things that we can't even imagine or even understand. And so, the idea that we're seeing this behind the curtain of the world we know, that the way that those two play together, I think is often big, particularly in cosmic horror.
Definitely, and I even like the phrasing of how you say that with the that it's something beyond what we can even imagine.
Hmm.
That phrase in and of itself invokes this need to imagine the most terrible things.
Hmm. Yeah.
It's the perfect like phrase to use in as far as as writing horror goes.
Hmm.
You get the person saying, well, man, it's beyond what I can think of as the worst possible thing. So what can I imagine as the worst possible thing?
And then is it worse than that even?
Yeah, yeah, that's yeah. I really appreciate the phrase there.
Hmm.
So I think that The unknown and the imagined are often fed by a fear of harm, but there are different types of harm that invoke these really strong emotions,
Mm.
and those would be like fear of not just like, for instance, when I say fear of violence, I'm not just talking about getting your butt kicked, because I don't know. I've had my butt kicked several times. It's not really that terrible of an experience. Sure, it hurts a little, but it's nothing to be terrified of. Um, so, you know what I mean? If I was going to be afraid of physical, it would have to be like somebody was going to rip my arms off, or gut me, or something along those lines. You know what I mean? It would have to be more than just some bruises.
Well, I mean, fear can be relative. What one person may find kind of harm that person may find scary may be different than what somebody else might find scary. Like maybe somebody does fear getting beat up. Maybe somebody else fears like getting a limb chopped off. It's all very relative, and depending on the character that we're talking about.
Right. I guess I feel like as a writer, I have to try and go after the things that would terrify me if I
Hmm.
want that authentic feel to it.
Hmm.
And I tend to want to go for those things because it's it best puts me in a place where I can describe what I'm feeling as far as fear goes.
Well, it kind of reminds me of Stephen King when he was asked this question, and his response was, "Everything scares me, just everything." And I can and given how effectively he writes about all kinds of different kinds of scary things, it's probably true.
All right, all right. What do you do when you're talking about trying to write something that gets people out of their comfort zone and stuff? Are you
Mhm.
I mean, do you reach for the things that terrify you, or do you reach for things more general that tend to terrify people?
I think I reach more towards the general side. I do try to kind of get into like personal fears, but I think it's a little bit more difficult for me the way that I do it. But I do like to kind of focus more on what other people find scary. I mean, there's a character that I kind of had in mind who's like scared of rats, and you can kind of understand why rats are might be scary to someone. I mean, they're disease carriers. They're these little filthy little creatures that run around, or that's how you might imagine them.
They can
Um,
they can
you know,
chew through steel.
right,
That's
right.
a big deterrent right there.
Yeah, yeah, I think not wanting to have your feet chopped off would be a nice thing too. So it's kind of like looking at basic things, looking at the ordinary, and seeing, okay, is there anything that you can do to make it scary to the character that you're looking at? So that's kind of one of the things that I try to do.
Ah, all right, all right. Couple of different approaches to that then.
Hmm.
So the fear of harm. Um, we talked a little bit about what we're talking about when we're talking about physical violence, but one of the most uh, detrimental aspects of a person suffering is what's going on in their own brain.
Hmm.
You think about it like, I mean, let's look at it even from an opposite side. Like when your heart is broken,
Yes, I
your
mean
entire
that's a
what?
big fear right there.
Right? Right? But when your heart is broken, your entire world is over.
Hmm.
You can't imagine anything but the suffering that you're going on. You can't think about anything else but this person that you've lost. It's this all-consuming thing that you eventually grow out of, but all the suffering is going on inside, and
Hmm.
yet it completely affects your entire life. I,
It's
I
almost
think
like a phantom pain, I would guess, in a sense.
kind of like that, but the mind is such a cage in and of itself that we cannot. The mind is not something you can escape uh, outside of drug use.
Hmm. Yeah, the mind is its own place, and it can make a hell of heaven or a heaven of hell, to mangle Milton a little bit.
Yes, yes, that's one of my favorite quotes from that book, actually. um, but in that aspect, there are many things that can cause anguish, even. There is, for instance, one scene, and this wasn't even in a horror movie that really got to me, was there's a scene at the end of Casino where uh, Joe Pesci's character is watching his brother get beat to death with, or almost to death even, with baseball bats. The dude is just a lump of busted up bones and bruises and blood by the end of it. And uh, the anguish of watching that happen to somebody that he loved would have been pretty traumatizing all on its own. But then they added the whole thing of he knew that that same thing was going to happen to him next, that he was going to get tossed in that same pit and buried just like his brother. It added there's that whole torment. There's that thing of, well, I'm afraid this is going to happen to me, and I'm afraid because of the suffering of somebody I love.
Right, and and it's very probable that the people who did it knew that that was going to be the reaction. And that's why they did it that way.
Right, right. But I think that those types of elements really in that scene defined for me mental anguish.
Mm-hmm.
It encompassed everything. It encompassed, there was emotional damage you were afraid of dealing with,
Mm-hmm.
that watching his brother get beat.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's that primal fear of knowing that that's going to happen to you.
Yeah.
I know that for me, when I first watched that, I was, shall we say, very protective of my family.
Mm-hmm.
So the concept of being held back so that I could not intervene as my brother was getting beat to death was, that part of it actually ate at me more than the fear that would happen to me next.
Yeah, I can see where that would make sense. There would be like an element of guilt in the middle of that.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Good call. That guilt that you can't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
And maybe the fear of being powerless again, and that's another thing that you can always play on.
definitely, definitely. So, what kind of elements did you want to talk about when it comes to horror writing?
Well, I would say one of the definite things that we want to think about, particularly when we're talking about comics, is being able to sort of show the fear visually, or at least the horror elements visually, because a lot of it is atmosphere, a lot of it is being able to show the tone. And I would say I can think of a couple of really good examples. One is the '70s Tomb of Dracula, with Gene Colan and Tom Palmer, who were doing the art. And a lot of what they did was a lot of really heavy shadows. There was always a sense that there was something behind what you were looking at, and and you just didn't know whether Dracula was going to pop out at any given moment. That kind of shadow work was really, really well done and very atmospheric. So a lot of the idea is, being able to build atmosphere. And I would say another good example in terms of showing this kind of thing is the movie Alien, the original one.
Right.
Uh, and particularly looking at how H.R. Giger designed like the alien ship and, the Nostromo. And with really the idea that the architecture itself kind of suggests the creature, and it suggests the core that took place on the alien ship, and with all the space jockeys being killed and all of this. And so a lot of that kind of sets the tone for the way that we want to look at it visually. Okay, we want to be able to have the art kind of reflect the kind of emotion, the kind of terror that we're trying to strike. And so,
I see
so a
what you
lot
mean
of
there. I think I,
yeah,
I'm picturing this in my head now. Sorry to interrupt you there.
yeah, no
Uh,
problem.
the how visually, we're looking to hint at what is happening without actually showing it. Like how you're
Right.
talking about how they designed the ship had these elements of what the creature was going to be like in it,
Hmm.
and it helps to feed the imagination.
Yeah. Yeah, because at this point, like particularly early on in the movie, like the first third of it, we really don't see the alien at all. We just see these dead aliens, the space jockeys. There we see holes burst into it. We see the eggs. We see things that are on the walls, but we never see the creature itself. But the architecture and the creepy way that it looks, it helps you kind of imagine what it might be like, and as you say, imagining a thing can sometimes be worse than actually seeing it. So you can use the environment as a way of playing on the imagination.
That is something I had not considered there. Good pickup on that.
Hmm.
Um, so, I mean, beyond just describing a scene,
Hmm.
you want to intentionally put things into a panel that are going to hint even in something like the architecture, that are
Right.
going to hint at the type of mood you want to. You're actually creating an atmosphere without saying anything,
Mhm.
just by showing how things are shaped, or how they are lit, how they are in shadow, how they're not.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you could look like a medieval torture chamber, and you might see like not necessarily somebody on the wall, but you can see like blood like on the wall, like next to a bunch of restraints, and you can imagine what kind of horrible things might have taken place there, that kind of thing.
Nice. That's definitely an element I hadn't really considered before. I was going almost purely on the story element of it.
Mm,
But
yeah.
that's
You can
a
imply
nice
backstory as
pickup from
well. So
Alien there. I like that.
yeah. Mhm. Yeah, and as I was saying, you can play on backstory with the background as well. I mean, that really is what Alien does. Like you really see like how bad the crew of the Nostromo is in for, just by seeing all these dead people lying around on the alien ship.
Right? Huh. Yeah, that's a good call for visual storytelling. You had some other nuances you wanted to bring into that.
Um, y- y- Not a whole lot more. I would say, just kind of like think about the effect that you want to create, think about the emotion that you want to capture, um, think about how you want it to look on the page. And sometimes, like applying an event can be as bad or worse as showing the actual thing. I would say, like, a character like being dragged, into a dark room by a creature, for example. You can show the character getting dragged into the room. You can show the door closing behind them, and then you can have like sound effects, or just maybe you can have like blood trickling out the door or things like this. And in this way, you can also play on the imagination, in that you can imply how horrific an event is without necessarily showing it.
Oh, that the slow burn build effect of the event.
Ah, yes, that too. And that's another thing that Alien does very well. It kind of drags things out a little bit in the first half as it tries to establish the atmosphere of the place, as it tries to, show and hint gradually at things going wrong. And things are not necessarily that bad until, the away team on the alien ship comes back, and then everything seems okay, and then you have the infamous dinner scene with the chest burster coming out of I think John Hurt, and that's kind of when you kind of know, okay, things are getting real at this point. Things are getting really bad, and that's kind of at that point. That's when you kind of go to the second act where you had the creature killing everybody one by one to establish the threat, and then at the end, then you have the third act where Ripley just has to survive against this thing against all odds.
I think that even that bit, killing them one by one at a time, like I mean, while you can slaughtering a room full of people is really graphically dramatic. The intensity is that you kind of keep with that slow burn that you had building up the story by doing it one at a time instead of in groups.
Yes.
Yeah, I like that. I like the idea of that of kind of slowly building it just a little bit at a time as opposed to jumping right into it. I tend to want to get right into the graphic violence of the whole thing.
Yeah. But you can make it like boiling frogs. At first it doesn't seem that bad, and then before you know it, the frog's in hot water.
Right, there you go. That's a good analogy for it. Make you kind of I'm kind of picturing you almost make it so where things are getting worse, but the people are adjusting to it as they're coming along, so it doesn't really seem like it's that bad until suddenly it all hits and all of it happens at once.
Yeah, and that allows for character growth too. I mean, you can have a character who's just not used to horror at all, and she's going to have to find a way to survive, and because of the gradual slow burn, the character gradually learns lessons, gets better at fighting this thing, figures out what this thing can do. Nightmare on Elm Street, I think, really did a great job of that. As this character, okay, gradually figures out, okay, these are the rules, this is what I need to do. And then towards the end, you have a more competent character who's capable of handling the creature.
Right, and they did do the thing. I liked. This was in the sequel, granted, but I liked how in Aliens, they had the slow buildup of Ripley really becoming that badass that happened at the end of the movie, where she was going to save what the girl's name. Newt. She was going to save Newt no matter what. There was nothing that was, and it was almost that Mama Bear versus Mama Bear thing going on. But how they built it up at the end, her slowly learning a little bit more about these creatures, her slowly learning a little bit more about how to fight and how to use weapons and stuff.
Yeah, and some of that was really her confronting her own fears, because she'd been badly traumatized in the first movie. So, that was basically her growth arc in that film. But I think that movie also plays on kind of what you said before about, fear for a loved one and kind of like imagined fear. Because she's concerned about Newt. She's not really so concerned about herself. She's concerned about this little girl that she's adopted. And that bond, her being able to make that connection, drives a lot of her change.
Definitely, and I think that this is kind of a sub point, but I think that definitely comes out more in that the director's cut.
Oh yeah,
you get to see a lot more of that relationship build up with her and Newt, and it really makes that ending scene of her fighting for Newt so much more powerful.
Yeah, I mean, because in a sense, and the thing I kind of really like about that is how the Ripley and the Alien Queen kind of are mirrors in a sense. They're both fighting for their children, and it's just that Ripley at that point has kind of learned to kind of throw away her fear and say, get away from her, you bitch. The classic line.
Technically, and I don't mean to be all geeky on you here, but I believe the line was "Stay away from her, you bitch."
Yeah. Yeah. More of my mangling quotes.
Sorry.
Yeah.
All right, that was a pretty good one. I think we learned some pretty cool elements about what goes into writing horror comics, or what goes into writing those more darker themed stories.
Yeah, and a lot of it is just being able to just understand how horror works, and then being able to imagine it visually and making it work for you visually.
Which is an important element in comic writing for sure. It half of what you're trying to write has to be done through what the artist is portraying.
Right. And that means being very clear about what it is that you're trying to show with that.
Right. That does make the panel descriptions go on for a paragraph or two sometimes.
Yeah, but I mean, but the page at the end is worth it. So.
Right. Well, thanks for joining me as always, Steve, on this Halloween special.
Yeah, glad to be here.
We hope that you guys enjoy your Halloween and have a ghoulish time, and read up some Omen comics. They're great for looking for a dark story.
I would say definitely Omen Comics is like the perfect place for Halloween, and I hope you enjoy.
All right, you guys have a good one.
Thank you for listening to the Omen Comics podcast. This has been Steve Sellers and Michael Nunneley here with Omen Comics, and we encourage you to look into all our Omenverse titles wherever they might be sold, including Comixology, Amazon, Draw Me and Comics, and elsewhere. If you like our content, please like, subscribe, hit the magic bell for notifications, and until next time, we'll see you in the Omenverse.